Well, Sunday School Leader, we're at the end of May. We're at the end of this unit. And remember, the unit is entitled Stand Up, How to Fight Injustice. We're in week 6, the very last week of this unit. And it's entitled Keep Standing, out of Esther chapter 8, the first 8 verses, and chapter 9, verses 20 through 22. And the point of this lesson is don't become complacent. Maintain vigilance. Have you ever heard the phrase resting on your laurels? I'm sure you have. A wreath of laurel leaves was given as a victor's crown in athletic events in ancient Greece and even in the early Olympic Games. The Greek god Apollo, he was pictured as wearing a laurel wreath on his head. And so this phrase that we've come to know, resting on your laurels, means, it refers to someone who is relying completely on past success for current recognition and future recognition. So I've done something really great, and that was wonderful when that happened, but next month, next year, 10 years later, if I'm still banking on that, that's not why we're supposed to keep vigilant and keep working. And that's what we see this week in this lesson. All right, now this I believe this prep talk is going to be shorter than normal. So let's see. All right, now in the Christian life, and even when standing against injustice, we can't rest on our laurels. Past successes do not ensure future victories. And that's what we see in this last installment in the Esther saga. Last week we saw that Haman received the punishment that he intended for Mordecai to get. But that wasn't the end of the story. Just because they cut off the head doesn't mean there's still not poison there to deal with. And sure enough, that was true. The decree that Haman issued, it was still in effect. We can look back in Esther chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, and see that edict instructed people to take up arms and kill all the Jews and plunder their goods on a particular day. But instead, Haman was the one who was killed, and his estate was given to Esther. Esther then in turn appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. Also, the king gave Mordecai Haman's signet ring that he had that gave him the authority of the king. So here's a couple of more ironic points. Last week we looked at a couple of ironies in the story, and here's a couple of more. It was Haman who was killed, not Mordecai. And it was the Jews, and specifically Esther and Mordecai, who got Haman's estate, not vice versa. It wasn't the Jews who got plundered, it was Haman who got plundered. Now the king just couldn't reverse his previous edict, but he allowed Mordecai to state an edict that the Jews could assemble themselves on that day. They could defend themselves and kill anyone who tried to kill them. And he sealed that edict with that signet ring. That was the official seal of the day, kind of similar to what I think of as remember the notary seals, not the stamps, but they used to have those raised seals. And when that was on a piece of paper, that indicated some authority, as well as if you get a passport, you have to have the official birth certificate with that raised seal that indicates that somebody in authority issued that. Then Haman sent letters to all the Jews in all the provinces, and he designated a time each year to celebrate this victory that they had. This turned into what's the modern day feast or celebration of Purim. Now, some takeaways from not just this week's study, but from the entire study of Esther. You might want to recap. I think this lesson is going to be a little bit shorter, so you might want to recap the whole book and just talk about some takeaways from the story of Esther. Whether it affects you directly or not, it's always right to stand up for what is right. All right. Also remember that God may have placed you where you are to be a positive influence in a negative situation. We're not always placed in positive, feel-good situations. Sometimes we're placed in those bad situations so we can be that positive influence there. Also remember, God uses unbelievers to ultimately accomplish His will and to fulfill Scripture. Also, God allows us to partner with Him. He doesn't need us, but He allows us to do that. We need to pray like it all depends on Him and then work like it all depends on us. Also remember that the business of God is risky. It's a risky business. It's not always safe and secure. When she went before the king, there was a possibility that she could have been killed on the spot. Remember that from a few lessons back. Also remember that God ultimately wins. God ultimately wins. Doesn't matter how bad the situation looks. That battle, that personal battle may be lost, but overall, God is the winner. All right, next week we're going to be in a new book. It's a new quarter, new series of lessons entitled Why Are We Here? And the first two of those lessons are going to be right out of Genesis. All right, like I say every week, don't forget to pray for your class. Hope you have a great Sunday school lesson.